I think the important thing is that communist China does not deserve a seat in the United Nations because they are not a peace-loving country as prescribed in the Charter of the United Nations. And I believe that even if we admit Red China into the United Nations, it will not become a peaceful country.
안녕하세요, 원다입니다. 지난 7월 1일 시진핑은 공산당 100주년 연설에서 외부 세력이 중국을 압박한다면 머리가 깨져 피 흘릴 것이다 라며 으름장을 놓았습니다. 또한 중국은 다른 나라를 괴롭힌 적이 없고 앞으로도 그럴 것이다 라고 말하면서도 대만이 독립시도는 분쇄할 것이다 라며 모순된 주장을 내놓았죠. 중국이 다른 나라를 괴롭힌 적이 없다는 이런 주장은 2016년 7월 사드 배치를 핑계로 한국을 괴롭힌 일, 호주의 반공정책을 문제 삼아 호주를 괴롭힌 일, 남중국해 영유권 갈등을 이유로 필리핀을 괴롭힌 일 등을 부정한 것이라고 할 수 있습니다. 또한 미얀마 군부에 의한 쿠데타로 현재 880명의 미얀마 시민들이 살해되었고 내전이 촉발될 위험 상황에 놓여 있음에도 불구하고 중국이 반대로 유엔은 미얀마 사태에 관여를 하지 못하고 있는 실정입니다. 국제협력을 증진하고 세계 평화를 유지하기 위한 목적으로 설립된 국제기구가 중국의 반대로 사실상 제 역할을 하지 못하고 있는 것이죠. 1956년 미국의 한 방송에서는 유엔 주최 교환학생 자격으로 미국에 온 고등학생들이 공산당 중국을 유엔에서 받아들여야 하는가 라는 주제로 토론을 벌이는 모습을 방송으로 내보냈습니다. 공산당 중국을 유엔에서 받아들여야 한다고 주장한 팀은 노르웨이 학생과 호주 학생이었고 이에 반대하며 공산당 중국을 유엔에 받아들여서는 안 된다고 주장한 팀은 한국 학생과 필리핀 학생이었습니다. 노르웨이 학생과 호주 학생은 토론 내내 이상주의적인 주장을 내세웠고 한국 학생과 필리핀 학생은 경험과 역사를 바탕으로 현실적인 주장을 내세웠죠. 이 방송이 최근 다시 공개되자 많은 세계인들이 65년 전 한국 학생과 필리핀 학생들의 주장이 옳았다며 그들의 통찰력에 놀라움을 금치 못했는데요. 특히 정확한 인지력과 판단력으로 65년 전에 이미 미래를 정확하게 예언한 것에 충격과 감탄을 금치 못했습니다. 또한 놀랍도록 똑똑하고 현명한 한국 학생이 토론 속에서 주장처럼 한국인들은 그들 나라를 그 누구도 함부로 대하지 못하는 강한 나라로 만들었음을 언급했습니다. 이 토론 이후 65년이 지난 지금에 와서 보면 저 두 아시아인 학생들이 중국에 대해서 정확하게 알고 있던 거였어. 한국과 필리핀의 토론자들은 명확하고 통찰력이 있어. 시간은 그들의 통찰력이 옳았다는 것을 증명하고 있어. 한국 학생과 필리핀 학생이 미래에 어떤 일이 일어날지 정확하게 예측하는 게 미친 듯이 무서워. 저 한국 학생 정말 똑똑하다. 젊은 사람이 세상에 대해 저렇게 놀라운 인식과 지각을 갖고 있다니 놀라울 따름이야. 한국 대표 학생이 말한 게 모두 옳았고 한국인들은 그들의 나라를 그렇게 강한 나라로 만들었어. 그래서 지금 중국이 필리핀을 괴롭히듯이 그렇게 감히 한국을 괴롭히지는 못하고 있지. 65년 전 미국 전역에 방영되었던 유엔 주최 미국 교환 고등학생들의 토론을 함께 들어보시죠.
About the world we want are four 17-year-old students who have been in the United States just 2 weeks. First is Nak-chung Paek from Korea, then Per alias Pete Rooston from Norway, Roman Cruz Jr. from the Philippine Islands, and champion debater Leslie Scholes from Australia. Now, Per, if I heard you right, you said it was going to increase the threat of war if we did not let Communist China into the UN. You want to explain what you mean by that?
Well, in order to understand my argument, I think we'll have to regard the purposes of the United Nations. United Nations aim to secure peace, but as the roots of war often lie in economical problems, I think that if the Red China is admitted in the United Nations, we would have a chance to let the subsidiary organs of the United Nations work in China and thereby to create better conditions of life, because I don't think it is possible to secure peace while a large percent of 600 million Chinese are starving or have bad living conditions.
But then that would mean that the Red Chinese government is not fulfilling its promise to the people. The communist government promises that it will alleviate the people from their sufferings. And now you claim that the Chinese people are starving. Now, do you think that a government that doesn't keep its promises to the people be worthy to be accepted to the United Nations?
I think that the Chinese government has the support of the people. Otherwise, I don't think it would have been able to throw the nationalist government out to Formosa, though I know that the present Red Communist government was supported by Russia. I think that if you regard on the conditions in Russia in 1917 and the present conditions today, you'll see large improvements, and I think the same would happen to China. In my opinion, people as the Chinese, they don't need freedom yet, they need food and clothes. That is the main thing when you are starving, not freedom.
Roman, also, if you think there are other Asian countries where the people are starving that are not under communist governments, so it really doesn't follow that we should exclude Red China just because the communist government has not as yet fulfilled their promise.
I think the important thing is that communist China does not deserve a seat in the United Nations because they are not a peace-loving country as prescribed in the Charter of the United Nations. And I believe that even if we admit Red China into the United Nations, it will not become a peaceful country.
May I ask you, if you say that communist China is not a peaceful country, would you say that Russia is a peaceful country?
Well, Russia was an ally of the United States and Great Britain and such countries when the United Nations was formed. And I think we would have a more effective organization if we have only the peace-loving and cooperative countries in the United Nations.
Listen,
Are you saying that Russia then should be excluded from the United Nations?
If possible.
Then what's the use of the United Nations if it isn't to discuss? And to discuss, you've got to have two countries with different points of view. If you put out Russia, then who have you got to argue with? No one. And the United Nations is ineffective.
It would be a farce. The United Nations would be a farce if you got Russia out.
Well, we can tell the people with action. United Nations without the filibustering of the communist nations can be more effective, and we can achieve more. And then the United Nations, which can achieve more, will mean more to the people who are starving, as you said.
Are you advocating the use of force by us to meet force?
Well, not necessarily, but if our freedom and our life is threatened by use of force by other countries, we have to defend ourselves with force.
But listen, do you think that it would gain our democratic cause by using the methods of communism? That's what I, for instance, blame Manus McCarthy for. He doesn't seem to realize that by using the communist methods, he actually loses his cause. That's what we do when we don't want to let China join an organization as the United Nations.
Well, it is one thing to use force in order to conquer other nations and rule it with their own methods. But it is still another that to defend ourselves with force when our freedom and our life is threatened. I'm always reminded of the blood and the sweat and the tears with which we gained freedom. In Korea, for instance, we fought with blood against Japanese imperialism. Then after that, we fought suffering 1 million of casualty against communist aggression. And can you say that you can just give away this freedom simply because force is the method that communists use?
May I ask you, do you think you could make peace by hating? For instance, let us say the Scandinavian countries, they were conquered by the Germans, but we don't go on hating Germans. We realize that if we shall gain peace in Europe, we have to accept Germany. I think you have to do the same in the Far East. Well, I could understand you. The people in Korea, they suffered a lot from due to communist attacks and stuff like that. But still, I think the sooner you forget it, the better it will be, because you're not supposed to think in 1 or 2 years. We are supposed to think in 20 or 50 years.
Of course, it's true. We hate communism, but we don't hate the Russian, Chinese, or North Korean people. What we hate is the communism, the ideology.
Yes, but can't you see that, John, that we're offering something else instead of force? That the United Nations is set up so that we won't have to resort to force. Well, that's what we want. If we can admit Red China to the United Nations, then we're laying the foundation where we can discuss something, and maybe we can do away with this force.
Are you sure that that Red China will avoid using force as soon as she becomes a member of the United Nations? We must remember that Communist China is adhering to communistic principles and practices. And we see from the writings of Marx, Lenin, and Engels, and any of those communist bigwigs, that force is the means to achieve their ultimate end, which is a classless society. If Red China is really communist, as she claims to be, then that means that she necessarily must adhere to communistic principles and practices, which is the use of force.
No, I don't think that. You see, that's perhaps the principles that the leaders of Red China follow, and it's probably the principles that the leaders of Russia follow. But can't you see that the people in China and Russia, they don't want that. They follow communism because communism was the Russia was the only country that turned to help China. Russia was the only country that offered them any hope of the people of gaining food, and that's what they were after. When they have that, then they're going to want more freedoms. They're going to want personal freedom, and they're not going to be allowed to be dictated by a communist government all the time.
And can you be sure that the right Chinese government has the support of the people?
I'm not quite sure on that point at all, because if they hadn't the support of the people, who are the people supporting? They're certainly not supporting this nationalist government
Yes,
that we're
but-
allowing into the
but-
United Nations.
Can we be sure that, yes, I know, the people in China, the millions of them, they shout "Long live Mao" when Mao's picture is paraded in the streets. They sing the Internationale when there is a parade. But can we be sure that they do these things not because they are afraid of getting a
But who are
bullet
we
into
to
their
judge?
systems?
Wait a
Yes.
minute, I'd like
We
to
can
say a
judge.
couple of words here. You say that it probably hasn't the support of the people. I would say that the same is happening in China now as happened in Russia in 1917. Look on what the communist has done to Russia since 1917 to the present date. I think that it makes sense to say that the present Chinese government has the support of the people because they have done, and they intend to do much to improve the present standard of living. And I want to give you some few facts too. You said that how could we be sure that if Red China is admitted in the United Nations, it won't improve itself? But we know that it is 21 nations in the world that haven't joined the United Nations. It is only among those nations that it has been a war after 1945. It has been between China, the two Koreas, and in Indochina.
Well, doesn't this seem to show, what Pierre's saying, doesn't this seem to show that if we had have allowed Red China into the United Nations, if they'd been in it, there may not have been a Korean War. We could have, then they would have had the foundation for discussion. We would have allowed them, we would have met them on equal grounds. But at the present, we're not.
Communist China, as we see from the recent history, has no intentions of abiding by terms and treaties.
Yeah,
You can see from the Korean War.
Discussion can only be successful when parties of the discussion have a same aim. The communist aim is not to be an honored and a respected member of a peaceful community. Their aim is to conquer the world and dominate the world and rule it by their own means. No.